What's going on, Leadership Network family? This is Myron and Jade and Bruce. And my friend Bruce is filling in today for Jennifer. And you have arrived at the Church Next show. We are all about 100% impact, 100% healthy reproduction. And we're going to have a beautiful time today talking about 7 questions that every leader have arrived at the Church Next show. We are and so the whole series today is called Back to the Future. The future really matters. The future is important. And reality is that with COVID, race, politics, all the things that we've experienced as leaders, church leaders are sometimes more unclear than ever. And so we wanted to be able to take a couple weeks to unpack really navigating the future together. So I'm glad y'all here. I'm glad Jade and my guys here, Bruce. Feel free to, if you have questions or if you're catching the replay, feel free to hit us up. But man, let's get into this. Jade, Bruce, how y'all doing?
Yeah, good. And Bruce, you can tell you're a little bit unused to being on the camera.
I know. I'm playing double duty right now. And so you probably heard the little introduction. So I'm trying to play 2 pedals at once, but I'm excited to be on this. I love this series.
We're excited to have you. So let's kick it off then with the first question, Myron. You can tell us why the Back to the Future series. Why is this important? Why have we decided to do this?
Yeah, so I've spent a little bit of time around exponential, and as we have launched into the Church Next show, I'm having conversations in different realms, whether that's suburban ministry conversations, urban, and even rural. And sometimes the conversations I'm having, leaders are feeling frustrated. Leaders are feeling, where do we go from here? They're having conversations around the next generation, conversations around meta and digital and phygital and church planting and business as mission. All these conversations are being had. And it got me to thinking about how it's easy for us as leaders when we don't know what to do. We conjure up something to do it, bring it back to our people and hope it sticks. That's one scenario. The other scenario is then, sometimes we as leaders, we go up into our upper rooms and we kind of have that mosaic or Moses complex where we come back down with a vision and we try to bring it to our people. And sometimes that vision, that 10, 20-year vision that's grand, never gets accomplished because we violated what I call the future pathway principles to really actualize and vision. And so that's the heart. We really want leaders, church leaders, to be more clear as possible as to where we're going, because I think that provokes our people to be confident that we can trust the leaders that God have entrusted to us.
That's good.
Yeah, Myron, I know you've talked about this subject of futuring, like the terminology of futuring. Can you just kind of dive in a little bit and talk about what that means to you and what you mean by futuring for the organization?
And first of all, is futuring an actual word, or did someone?
It's a Myronism. It's a Myronism.
Oh, it's a Myronism. Okay,
so, no,
that makes sense now.
No. So in academia, there's something called future studies, right? Or it can be used as transformative and strategic foresight, right? And it's really about like the understanding of alternative, possible, probable, and preferred futures, right? When it comes to worldviews and myths that also like underline them, And so there are many approaches to futuring, but it's a study and a skill that, if used correctly, could help change the trajectory of churches, right? And so that's why that's a really good question, because when I started training under this guy named Dr. Sahal, he has a school called Meta School, I believe. And what really got me going down this pathway is if anyone's familiar with it's not Myers-Briggs, it is oh my gosh, Gallup Strength Finders.
I love that.
Yeah, so my number one theme is futuristic.
Mine too.
Yeah, it's futuristic. which is why we're on this show together, because I hit you up and I'm like, and that was a whole God thing. But I was like,
Yeah.
man, how do I continue to actualize who God created me to be? And how do I get better at my futuristic thing? And so
Yeah.
that led me down the road of future studies. And then I started to think, oh my gosh, this as a discipline, this could be a game changer for the church, right? If we can learn and adopt this skill as church leaders.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that like one of the main components of futuring or looking to the future when it comes to our churches has a lot to do with technology, stuff like the metaverse and crypto and stuff like that? Like when you think about futuring, like where does your mind go? Because I know for me, when I think about the future, that's automatically I'm thinking technology, metaverse, what's going on with virtual reality, AI and stuff like that. So is there other components to it? And if so, what are they?
Yeah, I think first, as leaders, I think we're always thinking about the future
Mm.
as it pertains to spaces like tech or finance. When it comes to crypto and NFTs, all of those are spaces that exist because somebody thought about it.
Mm. Yeah.
And typically outside the space of the church, it seems like everyone around us are futuring. I'll give you a story. So you're familiar with the Wright brothers.
Yeah.
The Wright brothers came up with this grand idea that, you know, travel should be faster, and
Mm.
that this can't be like horse and buggy, and like it can't be just the only way, the only means. And I think that's where church leaders could draw some lessons from what can't be or what shouldn't be, because that's what they were saying, like this isn't right. And I think futuring is a byproduct of recognizing there's some things in our present that need to change if we're going to have a better future. And so they took this idea, believe it or not, some of the first few people to hear about this was the church,
Mm.
right? And one church member responded to the Wright brothers with this: if God wanted man to fly, he would have gave him wings, right? And so I use that as an example because the Wright brothers, they may have not framed it like futuring, they may not have said it, but they were really exercising strategic foresight. Futuring is all about strategically positioning ourselves to envision the future that we talk about, dream about, etc., in a systematic way, so that it actually gets done. Because I don't know about you, I've been part of churches years ago. I'd even say, hey man, God gave me this vision to do this, and a year later, somebody might say, hey, what about that? Oh yeah, that was an experiment.
Yeah.
And we, you know what I'm saying? We say that was an experiment versus owning it and saying, you know what, we didn't properly help our people move and transition into the future that we desire.
That's good.
Yeah. So how is this concept and idea of futuring, how is it helpful to church leaders, and what does it look like practically? Because, for me, I can talk from my own self. I used to be guilty of, like we said, my first on the Strength Finders is futuristic as well. But I am such a dreamer. I'm fine with dreaming and leaving it there. You know what I mean? It takes someone like a Mark Evans and a PE to actually get me to move. For example, the podcast that I have, I would have been fine just dreaming about it, all day long. But it took somebody like Mark and PE to push me into action and actually execute what I was dreaming and what I was seeing in the future. So then what does this look like practically? Like, yeah, we have all these ideas. We can think of all these amazing grand things for our churches. So yeah, the question is, how is it helpful for church leaders, and what does it look like for them practically?
Yeah, a couple episodes down the line, we're going to actually tap into what you said about PE and your guy Mark Evans and how they were added to the table. That's going to be very, very instrumental in actualizing a preferred future. I think it's helpful because of this. In most, upper, educational environments, there are classes like theology, systematic theology, every book of the Bible. I mean, there's just a number of, they may have a few things on leadership. But I think it's helpful to give, number one, church leaders a platform to train their leaders. I think when you discover how to accurately not only prescribe the future, but fulfill the future, like it's a win for the kingdom, right? So it's training is it. And second thing, I think it's like a framework. I think if we have a framework for futures studies or strategic for it, if we have a framework that's helpful, then that it could like change the culture of our churches. And then also, I think it moves us from wishing to hoping. I think a lot of the dreams we create are wishes that we haven't strategically created a plan around, right? And so when we think about church leaders, for us, even on the Church Next show, if we're going to have 100% impact or 100x impact, it's going to be because we've nailed down a method to truly featuring in a way that honors God. Let me give you the 7 questions, because I think and here's how we want to use these 7 questions. Say there's something going on in your church. Maybe there's a decline in attendance when it comes to the next generation. Or maybe the church lives in a residential area and the neighbors are upset about the loud music on Sundays, right? Or maybe there's a deficit in the budget because something as fierce as COVID showed up. Right. So the first thing is identifying, okay, what's the present scenario? What are we actually, what scenario deserves a deeper look at so that the future can be different? Right. And so when I nail down on that scenario situation, here's the first question I have to ask myself about that situation. What is the history of this issue?
Yes. Yeah.
What is the history? Because we've heard it said, like, if you don't look at the past, you're guaranteed to like repeat it. Right. And so when you ask what is the history of this issue, what you're saying is, I don't want to repeat this issue ever again. Right. I actually want to do something new. You can use it if you're an artist and you say, you know what, like my streams are going down. Like that's a specific issue. You know, if you're a Christian hip hop artist and you can say, okay, well, what's the history of this issue? Who else is it happening to? Is this the first time that it's happened to me? Right. Or maybe you live in a community and it was once like all, Russians making something up, but now it's more multi-ethnic and diverse ethnically and socioeconomically. And now the church you're in, who's used to ministering to Russians, doesn't now know how to make the transition into ministering to this community. Then you can begin to say, what is the history of this issue? Right. The second question is, what are your forecasts and fears as it relates to this issue if current trends continue? So using the church with the Russians, and now there's more of a eclectic, multi-ethnic, you can begin asking yourselves the question, well, what are your forecasts and fears as it relates to this current issue of now dealing with a new multi-ethnic? So let me ask you this. If you two were both Russians ministering to Russians, and now you have this new multi-ethnic group in your community, what would be some of the forecasts and fears as it relates to this specific issue if the current trends continue?
I think possibly not being able to properly minister to them if I'm not aware of their cultural background, or how they perceive certain things, and what pre-perceived ideas they're coming in with. Because if you don't know their cultural background, it's harder to minister effectively, I'd say. So that might be a fear.
Oh, yeah. I would say that the cultural, be able to relate and be able to understand as well as receive. Communication is all about receiving and communicating too. I think it's gonna be a big portion of be able to reach them and to be able to translate the gospel to them. 100%.
And so so do you see how this question becomes important? Because how oftentimes do we just first start out by saying, hey, this is where we want to go,
Yeah.
right? But if we say this is where we want to go without first exposing the history, but also the fears and what we can envision happening because of this change, then we'll actually, we won't be, successful in our endeavors.
We missed the mark.
So,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It gives us an opportunity to recognize our humanity.
Yeah.
That's
You
good.
know, so like when Jade's like the fear of not being able to minister.
Mhm.
That's a very real fear. And if we short circuit that process by looking over how, in this specific instance, Jade feels, then we won't have her full collaboration.
Yeah.
And if we don't have her full collaboration, we can't accomplish the mission.
Mhm.
That's good.
You see how powerful this is? But then the next question is an assumptions question. And here's the question: what are the assumptions you have made about this current situation?
Mm.
So let's keep with the scenario. So if you say, hey, Jade, there's a fear that I won't be able to minister, right, effectively, then what assumptions have you made about that answer, that response?
The assumptions that I've made is that the people that are coming in aren't going to be able to receive. Do you know what I mean? The assumption is that I have to change something about the way that I'm ministering because they're not going to get it. That's an assumption. They probably understand perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm. What
I think
about you, Bruce?
I always say that the assumption that you're not equipped for it, that you're not the right person for the job. That can creep in there, and that can affect how you approach the situation and how you manage the current tensions as you navigate through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the assumptions questions is so important because the reality is we all make assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
But when we expose our assumptions, what we're assuming, here's what it does. If everybody's around the table crowdsourcing their assumptions, then we're able to get it out on the table, because I venture to say that assumptions that go unchecked become the arch enemy of the mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It actually, you know what I mean? It actually, when you think about the gravity, obviously what goes up must come down. And when we don't acknowledge those assumptions, all of a sudden it weighs us down.
Mm-hmm.
And more oftentimes than not, we get at the end of a year or the end of a goal and we look back and we're feeling stagnant and hopeless because we didn't accomplish what we set out to accomplish. I'm curious, with you two, your experience in ministry and leading in different capacities, have you ever found yourself going after a vision and but not acknowledging the assumptions about the very mission that you're trying to accomplish?
Oh, yes. I was a associate pastor for a local church in Tennessee, and how to reach our mission was to reach the city, but the assumptions of how, who, where, like all the different points of how to reach the city were assumptions. And we just ended up throwing seed to the wind and seeing where it fell versus having a pointed direction where we could actually tackle and communicate with the city and to be able to give back to the city and pour into the city.
Yeah. I think for me, I learned very quickly that I can't make assumptions, and the assumptions weren't necessarily assumptions that I was making, but assumptions people were making about me. So being a missionary from another country such as England, where people think there's no hood, there's no ghetto, there's no poverty, a lot of people had assumptions about me that I wouldn't be able to properly minister to an urban environment because there's no such thing as urban in the UK. So that's a huge assumption that a lot of people have. So I took the first year of being on a mission trip to just observe the culture and for people to really get to know me. But it really had to come from PE, because PE knows both contexts. So he's been to England, he's seen my hood, he knows where I'm from. So he had to communicate to people, no, she really is about this life. She knows what she's talking about. So for me, I had a lot of it has been managing other people's assumptions about me and managing them in a way where I know people are going to have those assumptions. So let me, from early on, let me break down their assumptions and really over communicate about who I am and where I'm coming from. So that way, you know, people have their guard down a little bit and we can recognize some middle ground that they previously would have assumed is not there.
No, I love that. So a couple of things you said, I think in the context of leadership and looking at situations and wanting them to change and then accomplish dreams and hopes and goals and things like that. The assumptions question is an exercise in observation.
Yeah.
It allows us to look inside, right? So say, hey, you know, so let me give you a practical example. So in my city, one of the things that we're doing as a church is we're embarking on building an entrepreneurial ecosystem that can multiply in every inner city.
Wow. Yeah.
And so even though I'm indigenous to the inner city, even though I grew up here, I have influence, I'm embarking on something that for generations has been truncated because of systems and structures, because of division, because of poverty, all these things. And so we're like legitly trying to pull off something that bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And my team and I, we've had to continue. The beauty about this question is that you can continue to ask this question, right? You can use this question in a micro way. Say you're having conflict. Say I'm having conflict on my team when it comes to building an entrepreneurial ecosystem about, I don't know, how we're gonna, you know, provide micro grants and there's scarcity and things that are going on in our city. And at that micro level, I can ask myself, hey, what assumptions am I making about this conflict?
Yeah.
What assumptions am I making about this person?
Yeah.
Because we're on the same team. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The fourth question is what we call the alternative futures question, which is based on the last question. And here's the question: based on these assumptions, articulate different future scenarios. So take both of your last assumptions you made about our fictitious scenario and articulate a different future based on that assumption. What do you envision happening if this assumption comes true? Articulate that for me.
Go for it, Jade. I saw you kind of sneak.
It seemed like a long time ago. So the assumption you gave two assumptions. One of them
that
was
people will not understand.
Yes.
What's been communicated. I think if that assumption was to be true, then we'd have a lot of disengagement in the church because the people will feel less connected, so they would feel less part of the church. They would feel like they're visitors rather than a part of the body. I think that would be the biggest one.
Yeah.
No, I love what you just said. If that was to be true.
Yes.
And here's the reality. It could or couldn't be true. Right. So say that future scenario came to fruition, which ultimately started as an assumption.
Yeah.
Right. So we hope that don't happen. But because we took the time to define the assumption and articulate a future scenario, now we can prepare.
Yeah.
For when and if that scenario takes place.
Yeah.
That's the power in it. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about our visions, our dreams for the future, it's quite possible to overlook the fact that this scenario could happen. We don't look at the assumptions we made about it in the first place.
Yeah.
Quick question for clarity. I know we talk about assumption, by definition, assumption is something that's beyond factual. But in the moments, a lot of times, what could be our assumptions we believe is factual because of data points. and we're trying to think futuristically, sometimes we're still in the moment of the situation, of this crisis, or of the scenario. How are you able to discern what's truly factual and what is more influenced as assumption?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because when we bring our assumptions to the light, when we look at them from different angles, when I say, hey, here's what I'm assuming, and Jade is able to hear that, and Bruce is able to hear that, then we can together weed through whether or not that's true, whether or not that's true. And here's also sometimes reality is like some assumptions become true in our own mind. They're just actually fallacy, though. We're living out of a false belief. And I think, like, if we don't measure our beliefs, then we'll actually create those scenarios that aren't really the preferred future, aren't really where we're even going.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why I think this whole what I'm calling Futures Pathway, heavily inspired by Dr. Sahal. He's a Pakistani futurist. Dude is like legit, but it's helped me to think through. In fact, I'm coaching a guy that we're going to have on here in like, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks, about leadership and what he's learned on the journey. And I had opportunity to coach this guy for like 6 months, man, and to see where they were and where they are. You know, they were in a prevailing model traditional church, had this like church planting missionary mindset. They were kind of going on the traditional church planting track and going to launch large and all these different type of things. But after spending time with him and his wife, kind of thinking through the Futures Pathway, they have launched as a network of micro churches. The dude is functioning as more of a missionary trainer, you know, and training new missionaries, and he is killing it, man. All because he took the time to envision a different future, you know.
I think part of that too was he was envisioning with somebody else that was so in the weeds with it. You were able to process and pull apart. I know many times where my what I thought would be factual were debunked by a third party who was not in the weeds. I was able to step back and see the true facts of the situation. I think it's crucial right there.
Yeah, well, our good friend Jay Moon out of Asbury Seminary, we're going to be doing a summit together called Business Made Missional. He's going to actually do a segment on what we call the adjacent possible. It's just what you just said. That when I bring a thought, or I bring something that I'm thinking about or dreaming about, and I place it in this chat room with Jay and Bruce here, then all of a sudden new ideas, new innovations can happen, because you're adding, you know what I mean? You're adding to what is already on the table.
Yeah, I was gonna actually ask a question about that, because when I hear this and you hear about future stuff like that, I always think about the concept of prophecy. And you know, the Bible tells us that we prophesy only in part. So other people catching the vision or having another piece of it is so important. But my question is then, how do we create safe spaces for futuristic ideas to be shared? Because a lot of the time people don't like to speak futuristically because it sounds silly to a modern world or a contemporary church. So if you were to speak your futuristic ideas, you know, out of fear of looking crazy or too out of the box, a lot of the times we keep those ideas to ourselves. And when we do that, the other part of the vision is not able to be shared, you know. So how do you suggest that we create safe places for these conversations to be had? How do we make a culture of thinking and speaking futuristically?
I think we have to redefine the star. And what I mean by redefine the star, it was prophesied that, you know, that Jesus would come, and the wise man found Jesus based on the star. Is that right?
Yeah. But
everybody looking at the star that night didn't see that star as significant as the wise men saw it.
Yeah.
So everybody was looking at the same star, but not everybody was getting the same message.
Come on.
And so we have to redefine. When I say redefine the star, then me as a lead pastor, I'm not the star. Jesus is, and our message comes from him,
Yeah.
right? So why do I say that? I have to, I don't know if this is a word, but y'all know me, I make them up. I have to, us like us as leaders have to de-elevate. We have to like de-elevate our perceived status and acknowledge that there's a Christian celebratory thing in the church. We're the one with the most likes, the most follows, the largest churches, the most books. We deify those people. And when I deify them, I diminish my own value. So I always like it always starts with the leader. And as a leader, I have to decide, am I going to be, I think I mentioned this before, am I going to be Mike Tyson or am I going to be Customato? Everybody knows Mike Tyson, but not everybody knows Customato. Customato was Mike's trainer, right? He didn't get any of the spotlight, but yet he was instrumental in the success of Mike Tyson. I think pastors and leaders have to decide, do I want to be instrumental in the success of somebody following me? Or do I actually want to be the one being admired and followed, et cetera, et cetera? I think that begins to set like the culture of the church, that, and then that moves into everybody matters. That moves into Paul's admonition that when you come together, everyone has something to bring. That feeds you, prophesy in part, you see in part, right? It automatically like moves us to a Google culture or Wikipedia. Like imagine our churches being like Wikipedia churches where what I say isn't elevated over what someone else says because they don't have my title.
Yeah.
You feel me? And then I think as that begins to move, then we start to shift language and leaders. All of a sudden I start to be more free about who we're elevating because of their gifting and their character versus maintaining and protecting my own kingdom.
That's good.
Future's pathway never works for a self-centered leader.
Yep.
Because the future, it doesn't take one of us, it takes all of us.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a book right there. Woo. I like that. Man.
Is that helpful?
Future. Yeah. Very.
Wow.
But then we ask the question, once we've made an inventory of all the different variables or scenarios that may arise because of the assumptions we've made about our fears and futures that has its history in some particular issue. Then I can ask the question, what is your preferred future? So let me ask that question, keeping with our scenario, keeping with our, our fictitious church, who Russian church ministering to Russians, who now they've grown old, and there's a new generation of different ethnic backgrounds, and we've made some assumptions, we identified some scenarios, we've articulated those scenarios. What could be a preferred future for this church that's struggling?
To have a multi-ethnic church where all our congregants are fully engaged and being ministered to effectively and relevantly.
Wow.
Dang. Okay, Jade, she just dropped right there. Okay.
I want to be a part of your church.
Yeah.
I want to send a tithe.
I think taking that to a step further too is to multiply and be and a model for future plans to reach a community and continue to grow and multiply. I think that would be that's the preferred future, is to one, have internal health and to disciple those and love those, but also to multiply and be able to send them out. Not just be a factory to send those out and do the same.
So let me ask y'all this question. Even though this is a fictitious kind of simulated deal, what do you feel shifted in the room, in the digital room, when I asked that question?
There seemed to be like hope, like it kind of like unlocks a part of your brain where you start to dream again, kind of thing. Because you're not focused on the barriers or the potential barriers which we were previously discussing. Now it's kind of like, when people ask the question, if money was no option, what would you do? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that. It moves those barriers and allows you to dream and to think hopefully.
Mm.
I would say the same. It's funny that you guys talk about Gallup is because you both are very similar. I am a strategist, activator, and achiever. So I'm all about execution and building it out. So I don't do much dreaming. So it allowed me to feel that freedom to dream a little bit and to hope. I think that's a big part that I admire about futuristic thinkers, is that a lot of times they build off of hope. They hope for this, they wish for this, they drive towards this. And so I was watching our conversation, and we both spoke with more hope of like what we preferred to see in the future.
Yeah.
And so this is dope. Now both you just said hope, and you said, Jade, you said it unlocked hope. And here's the thing: when we ask the question, what is a preferred future in this particular instance in our life cycle? If we ask that question without question 1, 2, 3, or 4, it's always going to be at the back of my mind.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have this conflicted. It's like, this is our preferred future, but
yeah. So it will come with hesitancy to even say it out loud. Yeah.
It'll come with why? Because we didn't address what were the forecasts and fears of this particular issue if this current trend continues. Like, we didn't address it.
Yeah.
And we know it's there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like we know we have assumptions, but like we're having this rally around the preferred future without even looking at, here are some other possibilities that could occur that are surely based on the assumptions we have about this current situation. Right. And I always love it when I'm in the room because and we've arrived at that. Imagine if we were talking about like a real church, like, you know what I mean? Like what type of party we'd be having, because this is what happened, as Jade shared that, and then as Bruce said, I agree. Synergy.
Yeah.
Alignment. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, watch this. And that's the reason why we're having this episode. It's bringing what we're talking about, clarity.
Alignment. Yep.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: have you ever followed an unclear leader? If so, how did it make you feel?
Without saying it, yeah, I've followed unclear leaders, and it makes you feel lost. It makes you feel like you're wandering and putting efforts in something you don't see fruit of, or not sure what the fruit's supposed to look like.
Yeah, and it puts you in this challenging position, especially when you feel like you have ideas, you feel like you can hear where God is telling you to go, or showing you what the movement should be, but then you're in a position where you feel like you can't challenge that because that person is your leader. So it kind of like stifles your own futuristic thinking. It stifles your own dreaming and vision, because you feel like, well, I'm under this leader, let me be submissive, so to speak, and not overstep a boundary.
Right. And it's crazy because we've all been unclear leaders, because we're, you know what I mean? Like, we're human. And I think what futuring does is it moves the ball forward from less clear to more clear. And when I ask the question of like, what is a preferred future? Now we can do a follow-up question, which I think is the 6th question. And we can say, hey, how did you get to the preferred future then?
Yeah.
So in the preferred future, that's where we get to vision. That's where we get to add clarity. That's where we get to like get crystal clear HD, live live and live in color. This is what the future looks like.
Yeah.
Okay. how far in advance does this future look like? Is this future like a year out? Is this future 2 years out? Is this future 3 years out? Okay, oh, it's 3 years out. Great. Let's go 3 years down the line, right? And let's do what futurists call backcast.
Okay.
Right. So let's backcast. So that's the question. So how did you get to the future, right? By as you've used the backcasting tool. So what would you say? What are 3 to 4 big mile marker backcasting milestones that would have had to happen if the preferred future happened?
Diversifying our staff and teaching team.
Okay. Number one. What else?
Yeah, asking questions to better understand how to reach them.
Okay. Number two.
Creating more events for to provide as an opportunity for connection between the congregants.
I want to add a fourth. I would say identifying a way to not be burdened by financials going off the events, and that way we can dive into ministry. So identifying financial streams.
And so then in a teamed kind of way, we could say, okay, let's look at these backcasting events. These are significant. The 4 things you said, let's say for all intents and purposes that these are the most significant game-changing things that we did to get to that future. Then we'd have to assess, hey, is this particular thing that we said helped us get there? How do we know that that's what actually helped us get there? What evidence do we have? What facts? What would support this as the thing? Has it worked before, right? In another organization or in another church? And then as we have arrived together at, yeah, these are the 3 to 4 things. Okay, cool. Now let's take these and on a timetable, set real dates to these, and then do a mini backcast of those 4.
Yeah.
You feel me? And so we mini backcast it. So let's just take one of those. Diversifying our staff and teaching team. So let's mini backcast. What 3 to 4 things would have had to happen for our staff to become diverse in our teaching team?
Identifying roles that need to be filled, interviews with people, putting the word out there that we're looking for staff, identifying the need. Oh, I said that pretty much. Identifying the needs.
Yeah.
Okay. Identifying the needs. What else?
I think also identifying what you currently have. So not just the needs, but identifying what your current strengths are and versus assumption of strengths.
Yeah.
And so this is an example of the micro backcast, right? And so once we've addressed every single milestone from the original backcast, then we can micro backcast, and then we can start to say, okay, well, who best would help fulfill this responsibility? What resources obviously do we need, right? How much time do we need to give ourselves? All of a sudden we start asking those grassroots questions. You feel me? When it comes to backcasting. Now, there's only one final question that's helpful on this futures pathway, and it really has to do with what we call the inner story. And so here's the question: what is we call it a supportive metaphor for your preferred future? That's a fancy word for, let me ask you this, Bruce, when someone brings my name up, what do you like? What picture comes to mind? Not that I'm trying to be egotistical or in need of any over affirmation, but what picture comes to mind when you think of Myron Pierce?
Man, I think of a businessman with a suitcase, because you're always on mission. You always have. Honestly, that or graffiti, because every time I make a comment that we have these graffiti backgrounds. So I see a businessman walk with a briefcase on a mission with just papers upon papers of what he's doing.
Jay, when you think about your pastor, what picture comes to mind?
he's known as this, but I'd say like a Batman. Because like, he loves Batman. He's technology smart. He's like a genius at everything, and he just seems to get things done that seem impossible to the average person.
That's a legit picture, man. I want to be Batman now. I gotta get that out.
Oh, when I think of Leadership Network, I think of this like a well, a well of water, and people can come from all over to get however much you need to take care of the village. Right? Bruce gave a picture, you gave a picture, I gave a picture. And the reality is that every single one of us as church leaders, as dads, as moms, as missionaries, as husbands, as wives, as church leaders, as artists, we subscribe to an inner metaphor, whether we know it or not, of ourselves.
Yeah.
In churches, the metaphors that people have been using about church is, I'll let y'all answer it. What metaphors have you guys heard about subscribe to churches? The church is a
house. I've heard temple, community.
I've heard hospital.
Ooh, that's
hospital. What else?
I've heard scam.
Scam.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've heard some unflattering ones. Yes.
Yeah.
Psych ward. Yeah.
Psych ward. Right. And I've heard people say, the church is like a business.
Yeah.
And that actually hurts. In fact, there are metaphors that the church is subscribed to that's keeping us from the future God wants for us. Here's why. Whatever metaphor we use, that metaphor is a magnet that pulls us towards the future that we do or don't want.
Yeah.
So that's why you can have a vision to reach 1,000 people, but if you see yourself as a little mouse as a church, or if you see yourself as we're taking refuge from the world, right? The metaphor helps to create and manufacture the life of the church. Like, for example, if we see the church as a business, then what are some things that we do? We count how many people came to church. Why? Because that translates into money.
Your metrics change.
Yeah.
So your metrics are based on your metaphor. So the church, the metaphor we have for our church, I've been saying, well, we actually have two. We have a few more, but the first one is a family. We're a family tree.
Ooh.
That's the picture.
Yeah.
And what we grew up under or was influenced by or maybe because everybody else is doing it is the organizational chart. And those are two different those are two different pictures.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like somebody at the top versus the strength being in the roots versus all of us being interconnected and there's no distance between the high level CEO pastor and the volunteer. And it single-handedly transformed the way we do the way we are, function as a church. Like, for example, we don't have rows in our church building anymore. We sit around tables, right? My preaching time decreased from 40 minutes to 15.
Wow.
Why? Because we want more time to have disciple-making discussions around the table between us and our church members. And so when we ask the question, what is a supportive metaphor, we also have to ask simultaneously, what metaphor have we subscribed to?
Yeah.
You feel me? And then all of a sudden we can say, wow, what metaphor is going to help support the preferred future? So let's ask this question. What metaphor should this fictional church subscribe to if the preferred future that Jade just communicated is going to happen?
You go, Bruce.
I think I've subscribed to being a multicultural church.
Okay, and what kind of picture comes to mind?
A bag of peanuts. A bag of M&Ms. Sorry.
Peanuts. I was like, I think they look all the M&Ms. I like that.
She said a bag of
Anything.
peanuts.
Yes, if anything,
Okay, I
if
was
anybody
like,
wants anything from this,
hey,
it's
I
gonna be
was
a
gonna
bag of
be
peanuts.
like, oh, okay, like all shapes and sizes. Okay.
We were roll with it. We were both thinking, like, how can we roll with this? Yes. Bag of peanut.
Hey, Jay, we was gonna make it happen, Jay. We was gonna make it happen. But let's take that metaphor. Let's take that metaphor that we're back at M&Ms. Like we're different, but we're together.
Yeah.
We're small, but we're mighty. We're one, but we're many.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like all those, and all of a sudden, once you start saying, okay, what if this is the metaphor, what are the characteristics of this metaphor? Right. And then once we take the character, like we're one, but we're many. Okay, great. How can we take that message of we're one, but we're many, and begin to M that into our culture? Number one, let's start using that as language. We're one, but we're many. We're small, but we're powerful. Right. All of a sudden that becomes the messaging. It becomes the thing that we train on, communicate on, disciple on, right? We can build disciple making groups around that.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden what happens? We start to address, evaluate, and analyze every single thing about our church in light of the metaphor we're using.
That's good. Wow.
Wow, that's so good.
So those are the seven future pathway questions that every leader needs to be asking if the future is going to be as bright as we know it to be.
Yeah. So then how do we start to implement this into churches?
Yeah, I think one of the first things we can do is a church leader or a pastor can take the futures pathway and apply it to their life, apply it to one area of their personal life. Maybe it's like, maybe one is like, man, I haven't really been discipling people. And that pastor can say, wow, well, what's the history of this issue? And then they can start to look back on how they were discipled. And they can, you know what I mean? Right. Yeah. And then the second thing a leader could do is they could do it with their spouse. Let's talk about the issue of marriage. Well, what's the history of our marriage? Right. And then boom, you can take it to your leadership team. Hey, myself, my wife, and I, we've kind of been working what we call the futures pathway. We think it's helpful for actualizing vision. Hey, let's do this as a team. Let's pick one department in our church that's struggling. And somebody say, wow, I want to talk about our missions department, man. It is horrible. Oh, great. Okay, what's the history of this issue?
Yeah.
You feel me? And then all of a sudden they say, okay, what's the next department in our church? And what's the next department in our church? Right. And can you imagine every department in the church, every ministry in the church going down the futures pathway?
Yeah.
Right? Go ahead, Bruce.
I was going to say, you use a lot of terminology like the issue. Can this be applicable to things that are going right, but you maybe want to go better? You know, because it's easy to imagine things are going tough and trying to figure out, right, we need to turn this over and figure out how to get this better. But is this applicable to something that's already going well? Like, do we need to apply this to things that are already going well?
Yeah. So you can ask the greater question. Okay, this is going great, but if like, so for example, what is the history of our success in this area?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. And so now all of a sudden you kind of modify, hey, yeah, this is going good, but we want to go to great. Right. And then you just walk yourself through those 7 questions again, if it's something you want to get better or if it's something you want to become greater.
That's so good. That's so good. So can you, like, we said a lot this episode, and this was all for introduction's sake of our new series. So can you, like, just very briefly, because we have 5 minutes, just give a glimpse of what people can expect for the Back to the Future series?
Yeah, so we'll talk about, one shift that every leader needs to make. We'll go over what we call the used future. We'll talk about the power of addressing emerging issues, which is really taking a scan of your environment, your community, and identifying like emerging issues. We'll go over in depth what we talk about alternative futures, right? How do we bring more people to the table who can help provide a greater awareness of the future we're trying to create. We'll go in on like how to take the metaphor and link it to a strategy, right? And then how to really break down, vision sequentially, so that we could actually change the future that God wants us to create.
Wow.
That's so good.
Thank you so much, Myron. You really gave us a lot there to think about. And I'm excited.
I'll be chewing for a while. I'll be chewing on this.
Jay, you look like you're processing this whole conversation.
Yeah. There's a lot to think about. And you know what? I was just thinking, so my family say when my hair is like this, I look like the boss baby. So I feel like I'm the baby with like lots of things going on in my mind.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I love it.
that was really, really good. And Bruce, you're a natural.
Thank you. I really appreciate being on this and being able to be a part of this, man. This has been some great content. I've really appreciated just the thought-provoking questions and giving us the starting blocks in which we can implement into our organizations, to our daily life. I've really appreciated how you flipped it into that. All right, I've started this with my wife and talked about how to take this next pieces. I think sometimes knowing where we can first start is so important. So it's been a great conversation. Thank you for let me be a part of it.
Well, yeah, we're looking forward to it. I'm so thankful for Jade. Jennifer couldn't be with us today. Bruce, thanks for joining us, man. Hey, if this has been helpful, if you have questions about the Futures Pathway, feel free to inbox us at our Church Next show on Instagram, or contact me or Jade or Jennifer or Bruce via Instagram, or you can go to leadnet.org. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you can keep getting this content. I think we're done for the day, but we appreciate y'all. Jay, Bruce, has been fun talking about our fictitious church that needs to be diverse. And hey, we'll see y'all next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.